7:39, welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Martin this morning.
And let's take a look now what's in the papers. We've got Kevin Schofield and Candice Holdsworth. Let's get straight in. No, we're in the front pages first. OK, in the papers today, The Telegraph has a lovely photo of the Prince and Princess of Wales arriving at Royal Ascot by carriage yesterday.
And the Daily Star has a wonderful photo of super jockey Frankie Dettori jumping for joy as he celebrates his win at Royal Ascot.
And The Times leads with a photo from Glastonbury as fitness expert lockdown legend Joe Wicks puts the festival crowd through its paces.
There's absolutely everything going on at Glastonbury, isn't there?
Yeah.
The Mail has a photo of top banking bosses leaving Number 10 after they joined in talks with Jeremy Hunt to help households struggling with their soaring bills.
OK, well, now I was so keen to jump to it. It is now time to go through the papers with Kevin Schofield and Candice Holdsworth. Candice, shall we kick off with you this time? This is a story from The Telegraph, front page. Households to be spared £120 net zero levy. Good news for consumers.
Yes. So Grant Shapps has announced that a levy that would have been placed on people's bills to help fund the hydrogen industry, like experiments in hydrogen, which is seen as a clean fuel. It won't be added to people's bills now because they are just trying to decrease pressure on people's finances, because we've got the problem now of wages chasing inflation. So as much as you can save households, that's what they're trying to do. They haven't announced how it will be funded, though he said that they need to find other ways of doing it.
Are we already paying green levies on our energy bills? I mean, is it 15% of all bills is already funding subsidies? Yes,
so that was the model that was going to be used for funding hydrogen, because it's been used for renewables. But obviously now, with prices going up across the board, you have to really think how much you can tax people. And if you can find other ways of doing it, it's probably preferable.
Well, meanwhile, we, of course, had this meeting at Number 10 yesterday where Jeremy Hunt, particularly, was talking to leaders of the banks to try and come up with some sort of help for us all.
Yeah, I mean, the government obviously is under an awful lot of pressure to be doing something. A lot of people on mortgages, variable rate mortgages, are seeing them go through the roof now that interest rates are going up so quickly. So, yes, we dragged in yesterday, as you mentioned, several of the bosses of leading high street banks. So they've come up with some measures. I mean, tinkering around edges, really, but it will make a difference to some people. So, for instance, if you're threatened with repossession, you'll be granted a minimum of 12 months grace from your first missed payment, so you won't lose the roof over your head. People will be able to shift onto interest-only mortgages without it affecting their credit ratings. Obviously, that's going to help because that brings down your costs as well. The problem, though, is that interest rates are only going one way. I think they're probably going to go up again, in which case the problem's only going to get worse.
So you're just kicking it down the road,
again. And again, you're right, these mortgages ultimately will have to be paid off. So you are storing up problems for the future. But the government will be pleased that Martin Lewis, money-saving expert guru, has welcomed it, which, I mean, he is so influential, that guy. If he comes out and gives it the thumbs down, that's really bad news. So he's given it a cautious
It could make a big difference to a lot of people. I've got an interest-only mortgage. I took the gamble when I bought in London that my house price would go up, and therefore I just paid the minimum. The difference between a repayment mortgage on my property was about quadruple.
So what happens with this? You pay just the interest.
You service the interest and never reduce the debt. But when you sell your house, you're hoping it's going to be enough to wipe off the debt and keep the change. So that's what will happen with the interest rate only people here. They're just paying the base rate 5%. And it will, if they have a repayment mortgage, it will significantly help their mortgage to go down if they have a sizable mortgage, which, let's face it, most are now.
Yes.
So actually, I think
if that's such a good idea, why doesn't everybody do it?
Because they want to pay their mortgage off. So it will extend the term of your loan. So it will make, effectively, you've missed 6 months repayment, so you'll be paying an extra 6 months at the end. There's no free lunch here.
Yeah, no,
yes,
exactly.
You basically pay it later.
But the issue is, you know, what's happened with the interest rates. When people initially took out their mortgages, apparently, from what I've read, they were stress tested to see what would happen if it went up by, say, 3 times. But that benchmark has now been breached. So, I mean, when people initially took out their mortgage, they didn't know that there would be such a sharp rise in interest rates. So, you know, I dislike all the crowing about, well, you need to manage your finances better. They couldn't have foreseen this.
Yeah, one thing I think is really good about this, actually, which I know Martin Liz will like, is that you won't have your finances checked. So a lot of people at the moment will be quite concerned, if their pay isn't keeping, matching their, or maybe they've changed jobs or circumstances have changed, they won't be on the same money. You won't have a bank nosying around about what you're earning, and that's a real stress for a lot of consumers. Because, if I don't meet the criteria, what, they're going to take my house off me? So actually, I think there's a lot of merit in this plan.
Oh, well, I hope it works for people, I really do. Candice, you've been looking at the terrible tragedy of what happened with the OceanGate Titan submersible. Yes,
we're all talking about this. There's a story in the Times which I think is absolutely fascinating and sort of illuminates what went wrong in this tragedy. And it was a colleague in the submersible industry had told Stockton Rush, the chief executive of OceanGate, that basically they were cutting corners when it came to safety. And I just think that this is such a powerful quote from him. He said, "There's a line where self-confidence crosses into arrogance, and Stockton Rush crossed it. He ran a toxic safety culture where if a concern was raised, he would get rid of the person raising it."
Wow.
So there were a lot of people saying, you need to submit your ship to basically some sort of external validation. We need to see if this thing is seaworthy. Wow. And he said no, because regulation is preventing experimentation in the industry. Fine, if you're just the one bearing the risk, but I don't think a 19-year-old can assess that risk properly.
And interesting, Anne, when we were speaking with Gareth Russell earlier, an expert on the Titanic, and he was saying that the company, the latest line is they've gone into liquidation. So knowing that there's going to be a whole raft of lawsuits and litigations against them, they've basically gone into receivership, so that can't happen. So many questions got to be asked about what seems now like the dodgy dealings of this company.
Yeah, but it seemed as though an awful lot of people were trying to warn everybody about this, but there was no industry watchdog or anything like that took any action.
I know, and you need that. I mean, the aviation industry is as safe as it is because of all the protocols that are in place. I mean, pilots have to follow a huge checklist before they even take off. And I was reminded of the Challenger disaster when they investigated that and what went wrong, and it was the same. They completely underestimated the risk and apparently didn't listen to various engineers who were saying that it's not safe.
It happened throughout the space programme. Various times they were found to be cutting corners. And so they had to stop everything and then review it and then go ahead.
Yes.
It happened with Apollo 1. I mean, there again, I was confounded when we were talking about the possibility of this submersible maybe on the surface bobbing around in the ocean, and that they were looking for it in that case. But still, there was an oxygen problem because they couldn't open the hatch from the inside. It could only be opened from the outside. And how crazy is that? Everybody knows the lesson of Apollo 1, because the astronauts couldn't do the same thing. The hatch couldn't be opened from the inside, so when fire broke out, they couldn't get out themselves, and so they rebuilt the space capsule to have to openable from the inside as well.
I mean, there's always a balance to be struck, isn't there, between innovation and regulation, especially when it's something as dangerous as this. And it's tragic, I guess, that it will have taken the deaths of these people to actually, make sure that there is proper regulation in place, despite what Boris Johnson says in his column that we spoke about. He's talking about no regulation.
Disagreed with it so much. I felt he missed the point completely.
OK, we'll need to speed ahead to this one that I find fascinating, Kevin, about British Gas offering us half-price electricity on Sundays.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing. I hadn't heard about this at all until I read it in The Guardian this morning. And, I mean, if you think about it, Sunday is the day probably when we use energy the most, because everyone's at home, you might be cooking a roast, catching up in the housework, all your washing. So basically, British Gas are saying, right, between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. on a Sunday until the 24th of September, we're only going to charge half price. Now, in order to get your money's worth out of this, now, potentially it could save you 30 quid over the next 14 Sundays, but you would have to really go for it in terms of use your electric oven for 2 hours, a full hour using an electric hob, a vacuum cleaner, a washing machine and a tumble dryer.
You'd have to do everything on a Sunday.
10 cups of tea or coffee and play video games for 2 hours. So really go for it in that 5 hour window.
Absolutely.
A massive, so much for it being
You could do the week's cooking on a Sunday.
Day of rest.
Yeah.
It's a flurry of activity for 5 hours to make your...
Another thing, Kev, that I see as a problem coming down the horizon is this is going to be 11 till 4 o'clock when everyone argues about who does the housework.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks a lot, British Gas.
Absolutely.
I'm being nagged into doing the
Yeah,
roast,
and then the grid goes down because everybody's using electricity at the same
That's it.
time.
We have a power cut and we'll fall out about that as well.
Do you have to be with British Gas? Can you be with any other energy company?
No, it's a British Gas.
It's a British-
offering its customers
Oh, I
only.
see.
So half price electricity every Sunday this summer.
Sounds like a cynical marketing ploy
I
to me.
know, but isn't the future
And
now
we've
where we
talked
have
about
this
its pastry
very
garden,
well?
so that it's worked. It's worked.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for that. We'll see you again in an hour's time.